Great. Okay, shall we begin? And ladies and gentlemen, good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Meng Ke. I teach sociology and social policy at the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University. It is my honor and great pleasure to be here and give this lecture. It is the 8th and final episode of China's approach to poverty reduction series. Today, the topic is slaying the giants in China. So let's begin. Okay, yeah, slaying the giants. So I would like to first explain what do we mean by slaying the giants. What are the giants? Where do they come from? Nearly 80 years ago, on December the 1st, 1942, Britain got a glimpse of the future. For this day saw the publication of the report on Social Security and Allied Services, which is forever known as the Beveridge Report, which is named after its author, academic and former civil servant, Sir William Beveridge. So in this report, Beveridge sought to design a new system of social security and to defeat the social injustices and social ills that were the defining feature of the 1930s. So at the heart of Beveridge's plan was the creation of a compulsory social insurance scheme. This report, commissioned and published by ministers, but not actually owned by the government, was widely welcomed in the media at home and abroad, hence the overseas tour of this author. So this lecture today, we are using the conceptual framework of the 5 giants provided by Beveridge to analyze China's solution towards welfare system, poverty reduction, and shared prosperity. Okay, so next, yeah. From this portion of the original text in the report, we get a hint of what the 5 giants are. Beveridge's vision was to battle against what he called the 5 giants: want, ignorance, disease, squalor, and idleness. So what are their causes and solutions? First, want. It refers to poverty, meaning when a person's resources are not sufficient to meet his minimum needs. As for disease, which often causes that want, usually caused by deficiencies in medicine, sanitation, nutrition, healthcare services, etc., etc. So Beveridge believed a free healthcare system accessible to all would be the solution. Then ignorance. It is caused by lack of education. The solution is not about simply raising a school age literature, etc., but the educational assistance and the reform on the whole education system on a massive scale. The next, squalor. It is caused by disorder created by urban expansion and poor housing. Beveridge's report argued for an ambitious council housing building program with strong rent control and proposed a living tapestry of the mixed community. Finally, idleness. It is caused by unemployment or the lack of jobs, which destroys wealth and corrupts men. The solution requires a new determination to fully use the state power to maintain employment and, of course, reduce unemployment. So clearly, want or poverty is only one of the 5 giants on the road of common prosperity, and in some ways the easiest to attack. So it is highly related to the other giants, namely disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. So that is to say, to have a long-term solution to poverty reduction, one needs to deal with the other giants as well. After learning the conceptual framework of the 5 giants, we are stepping into China's reality in slaying the giants. Let's begin here with the giant of want. As we can see from this diagram, the number of rural residents living in extreme poverty decreased every year. At the end of 2020, China achieved the goal of eliminating extreme poverty. Nearly 100 million people in rural areas who have lived below the poverty line or shock of poverty, and more than 800 designated poor counties, mostly in the western and central regions, or also out of poverty. So that's a great achievement. So the criteria for lifting out of poverty also include what are called two assurances and three guarantees. That requires ensuring adequate food and clothing and access to compulsory education, basic medical services, and safe housing. So if we compare the poverty trend across the globe, we can see that China actually has experienced the greatest national reductions in people living in extreme poverty. So having battled the giant of want, we have to ask the following great question. What about the other four giants? So let's start from the giant of disease. Here, we will begin with a short video about a case in Hebei province for a brief overview of how disease is forced upon in China.
今年40岁的方向奎是河北邯郸魏县人，多年来一家4口一直靠养羊为生。2017年底，方向奎一家终于脱了贫，但是正当他准备扩大养殖规模、改善生活时，妻子却患上了恶性肿瘤，花去了家里大部分积蓄，全家的担子都压在了方向奎肩上。
在医院的时候，2个人都身上都剩100块钱，也都是家里边所有家里边都剩100块钱。
为了治病，方向奎前后花了15万元。 除去医保报销和大病救助，个人还要负担5万元，这可愁坏了他们一家。
肯定是返贫了，那没有收入，而且爱人身体又差，自己又出去做不了工作。
在魏县，像方向奎这样的家庭不算少数，他们收入不多，刚过贫困线，被称为边缘抑制贫户。还有一类人，他们的收入虽然在贫困线以上，但收入也很低，在贫困线标准1.5倍以内。 按照2018年的标准，也就是低于4800元，无法享受到脱贫政策，被称为脱贫不稳定户。这2类人的共同点就是都徘徊在贫困线附近，一旦生活有个变故，便很容易滑落到贫困线以下。以魏县所属的邯郸市为例，2016年有20万人脱贫，但同时又有近5万人致贫返贫。
致贫和返贫主要是2大原因，一个是支出骤增。 一个就是收入骤减，对支出骤增的，我们通过工作发现，主要是3大原因，就是因病、因学、因灾，我们就建立了防贫基金。
为了帮助徘徊在贫困线上下的这2类人，邯郸市于2017年在魏县试点设立了精准防贫基金。魏县有80万农村人口，最容易返贫致贫的贫困户和低收入户大约8万人。 按照每人50元的标准，县财政每年拿出400万元精准防贫基金作为保险金，交给保险公司负责管理。只要家庭年人均可支配收入在农村最低生活保障线以下，或因病、因学、因意外事故、因产业风险支出在一定数额以上的，都可以申请保险理赔。
他们有专业的队伍去核查这个家庭的情况，出现问题以后。 他们比我们的乡村干部，要有专业性，同时呢，也避免了乡村干部在这个核查的过程中有心后有，避免了廉政风险。
这套机制的最大特点是，它保的不是个人，而是全县80万农村人口。每月，医保、教育、民政等部门都会把符合条件的人员筛选出来，交给保险公司入户核对。 然后再交给公安、银行、房管等部门复查。方向奎一家就是这样被精准识别出来的。由于医保和防贫保险的赔付，所以方向奎妻子15万元的医药费，最后自己只掏了1万元左右。
小额贷款，一下给我批了5万，拿着这些钱，都开始养羊了，一步一步走到今天，日子越来越好。
Okay. After watching this video, what's your main takeaway? The main character in this case is Mr. Fang Xianghui. At the end of 2017, his family finally got out of poverty, but just when he was ready to expand his small business, his wife suffered from a tumor, which cost most of the family's savings. So in order to cure the disease, Fang Xianghui spent 150,000 yuan before and after. So after medical insurance reimbursement and major medical aid, he still has to pay 50,000 yuan So thanks to the medical insurance and the poverty insurance payout, Mr. Fang's wife's medical expenses end up with paying only 10,000 yuan only. So that's a story from an average Chinese citizen. And that you can have a closer look at the big picture, which is the structure of medical insurance in China. The Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party and the National People's Congress are responsible for health legislation at the top level. However, major health policies and reforms may be initiated by the State Council, and these are also regarded as law. The State Medical Insurance Administration oversees the basic medical insurance programs, catastrophic medical insurance, a mortality insurance program, the pricing of pharmaceutical products, etc., etc. So there are basically three types of medical insurance in China. First, urban employee basic medical insurance. It is financed mainly from employee and employer payroll tax with government funding, of course. Participation is mandatory for workers in urban area. Secondly, urban rural residents basic medical insurance. That covers rural residents and urban self-employed individuals, children, students, elderly adults, and others. The insurance, by contrast, is voluntary at the household level. Finally, urban rural residents basic medical insurance. It is financed through annual fixed premiums. Individual premium contributions are minimal, and the government's subsidies for insurance premiums make up the majority of insurers' revenues. So that is the basic structure of China's medical insurance system. I know it may seem complex, okay? So why not we have a mind map, so a citizen's view. So let's assume if you are a Chinese citizen and if you got sick, what do you do? The first question is, are you in your hometown? If yes, do you have private insurance? Yes, then you can go to a private hospital. If you are not in your hometown, okay, did you pre-register for healthcare when you arrive? If yes, and you do have public insurance, then you end up with going to a public hospital. And of course, there are more circumstantial contingencies. For example, is this an emergency? Is this a long-term illness? Do you have savings? The different options will drive you to different medical services. But I emphasize here, the bottom line is that you definitely will get treatment because China achieves near universal coverage through the provision of publicly funded basic medical insurance, as we can see from this graph. This year, China is driving for the expansion of medical insurance coverage. From 2011 to 2020, the number of participants in urban basic medical insurance nearly tripled. Of course, there are also lots of challenges we encountered during the expansion. First, in view of the fast growth of medical costs in China, it is necessary to maintain a moderate separation and mutual restraint between medical insurance management agencies and medical service providers. Secondly, controlling the unreasonable increase of medical cost is the basic goal of the medical insurance system, but it should not become its ultimate purpose. Thirdly, there are still underlying problems in setting measurement objectives, vertical division of management authority and responsibilities, etc. Last but not least, in the context of the gradual improvement of the universal health care insurance, China's medical insurance is facing the pressure of fund balance. So how to make full use of big data technology to monitor medical insurance cost needs a higher level of digitalization of the medical care system. So next, we are going to talk about another important type of social insurance, and you may have guessed that is old age insurance. So the expansion of medical insurance in China is very much linked with the trend of population aging, which also caused the growth of China's old age insurance. In this chart, we have total population aged 65 and above, as well as the elderly dependency ratio, which, as you can see here, is measured as the population aged 65 and over divided by the labor force. As the increasing trend of the two variables in this chart indicates China indeed is having this huge challenge of population aging. Against the background of aging population, just like the medical insurance coverage, China's old age insurance is having expansion as well. As you can see from this graph, more and more people are participating in pension insurance and a higher coverage rate is achieved. However, there are still plenty of challenges get in the way of this enterprise. The first challenge is to achieve further expansion to cover more workers in flexible employment. Secondly, heavy pension debt affects the delivery of pension payment. The third challenge is about the consciousness of insurance and the defect of payment mechanism that makes contribution collection sometimes very difficult. The final problem is related with the dual structure of old age insurance between urban and rural areas. So medical insurance, old age insurance, we are just studied, are actually part of China's social insurance system. What do we mean by social insurance? It is the public insurance program that provides protection against various social risks, such as loss of income due to sickness, old age, work injuries, unemployment, and maternity. And in social insurance, participation is, of course, compulsory. So except for the medical insurance and the old age insurance, China's social insurance scheme is also composed by maternity insurance, workers' compensation insurance, and unemployment insurance. Those 5 insurances in China, as we call it in Mandarin, wuxian, is a very important cornerstone of the whole Chinese welfare state. Generally, China achieved rising coverage regarding all 5 social insurance. And apart from coverage, there is another important indicator, a measurement to show how China is doing on social insurance system. And that measurement is expenditure. This is the historical chart of total expenditure of the 5 social insurance funds as a percentage of China's GDP. As you can see from this diagram, the total expenditure increased from nearly 4% in 2011 and to 8% in 2019, which indicates that China is spending more and more on social security. And you may say, that's a lot. Of course, it is a lot, but this is only one part of China's overall social policy system. Let me give you a fuller picture. So this graph shows the overall level of social spending in China. In this chart, line 1, okay, the blue line, represents the discussed 5 social insurance fund expenses as a percentage of GDP. As we can see from this graph, the spending doubled from 2011 to 2019. Next, line 2, okay, the orange line, represents public expenditures on education, social security and employment, healthcare, family planning, and public housing, plus line 1. So this also increased rapidly. Finally, line 3, the gray line, that represents public expenditures on poverty alleviation, agriculture, forestry, and water on the basis of line 2. This has seen a rapid increase as well. So to have an international comparison, line 4, the yellow one, presents the OECD average level of total social expenditure as a percentage of GDP. So as you can see here, for OECD countries, even though line 4 started quite high at around 20% of their average GDP, but it did not increase much during the period we are looking at. The overall spending actually even fell a little bit in recent years. So it is clear from this international comparison that China's social policy spending has increased to a level that is comparable to developed countries. So that is what we call a tremendous rise of the Chinese welfare state. So all those public expenditures on public pension, healthcare, employment, and family policies, etc., are what we call explicit social policy. What do we mean by that? By using that term, we mean the situation in which organized power is deliberately used in an effort to modify the play of market forces, according to one of the famous British social policy theorist, Arthur Bridges. The reason why market forces should be modified is that market mechanisms create something we call market dependence. By market dependence, we mean the situation in which one has to participate in labor market, selling his or her labor force to earn an income to make a living in the modern world. And that is to say, if your participation is disrupted by certain events or incidents, such as old age, illness, work accidents, getting laid off, or giving birth to a child, then you lose your ability to generate income from the labor market, thereby suffering a loss of welfare. In those cases, to prevent that from happening, the government then step in to provide income support for individuals to help them to get through those difficulties. And that government supports those income maintenance programs is what we call explicit social policy. Okay. Now, so much for that. Okay. So now we are going to talk about the second giant, ignorance. And this video will start with this clip. I'm going to play a video about a case in Sichuan province for a brief overview of how ignorance is forced upon in China. Okay, let's watch.
Making traditional dim sum dishes like thin buns, dumplings, and other delicacies. It's a course designed for people from impoverished families in Santai County. For trainees like Li Li, the sessions are interesting, but more importantly, beneficial.
I've learned a lot from the training. It's of great help to me. Based on what I acquire here, I hope I can open a snack shop in the future to help with my family's livelihood.
In the past 3 years, the Human Resources Department of Santai County has provided free training sessions to more than 18,000 farmers. The courses vary from culinary to electro-welding programs. Zhongbo, head of the Employment Center at the Human Resources Department, considers this initiative an innovative feat to fighting poverty.
Through various poverty reduction policies, most of the families have been taken off the poverty list. In order to prevent them from falling back to poverty, it's very important to help them master certain skills to better integrate with society and become self-reliant.
Zhong says the training programs have been well received by many of the villagers.
These books compiled by the Human Resource Department record the training programs in detail. Actually, vocational training is just a part of their efforts. The department will also help the trainees find employment through different approaches.
A database was set up in 2014 to keep track of those in the labor forces living in poverty. Based on the data, the department updates residents with the latest job openings and holds regular job fairs in the villages. The system has led to the employment of over 13,000 people within the past 3 years. Financial support is also available for those aspiring to start their own businesses.
We can provide interest-free loans of up to 150,000 yuan to whoever wants to create their own programs for 2 years. If the program succeeds and offers employment to others, we will provide additional support.
Li Li says, with such policies in place, her dream will not just end up in the air. And like her fellow villagers, she's now more optimistic than ever for a better life.
Okay, so having watched this video, what are your main takeaways? I think at least 4, right? The first one, after taking off the poverty list, what's next? Okay, So it is important to prevent people from falling back into poverty. Therefore, help them master certain skills to better integrate with society and the labor markets and become self-reliant, become an effective solution took by this county government. So in this case, the Human Resources Department of this Shanghai County has been providing free training sessions to more than nearly 2,000 farmers who live in poverty. And in this clip, Lily, one of the trainees, decided to open a snack shop in the future to help with her family's livelihood. And vocational training is just one part of it, actually. Local governments have also taken measures to help the trainees to find employment through different approaches, such as various vocational workshops and job fairs. They also set up a database to track labor force living in poverty and provide them with the necessary training sessions. So you can see the power of big data, the latest AI technology here. So in this section, okay, we are going to analyze vocational education in China when China tries to slay the giant of ignorance. We will start from a brief analysis of China's education system. When kids were born, okay, in China, they spend their first 5 years in kindergarten or preschool education. After that, they enter elementary school when they are 6 and get graduated when they are 12. From 12 to 15 years old, kids enter junior high school. Later on, before senior high school, students will think about which road to choose, whether go to a secondary vocational school or senior high school. So if you decided to enter secondary vocational school, you will enter labor market as soon as you graduate. So for students who choose to enter senior high school, they need to participate in Gaokao, okay, which is the university selection test, the entrance examination, similar with SAT or A-level you may find in the Anglo-Saxon countries. And they can decide whether to enter university or higher vocational college that provides a diploma. So this is about the education path in China. But let's look at vocational education closely, okay? How does it operate in China? As you can see from this slide, vocational education in China is provided at 3 levels: junior secondary, senior secondary, and tertiary. First, junior vocational education refers to the vocational and the technical education after primary school education, and it is part of the 9-year compulsory education. And secondly, the secondary level mainly refers to the vocational education in senior high school stage. So composed of many branches like specialized secondary schools, skilled worker schools, and vocational high schools, etc., etc. So the vocational education plays a guiding role in training manpower with practical skills at the primary and the secondary level of various types. Finally, as you can see here, tertiary vocational education, it emphasizes the training of practice-oriented skills at a higher level, okay? It composed of different 4 types of schools, but I will not go into details for that. But I will spend a few minutes on how does this system actually work. To answer this question, we need to see each actor or institution in this system and their respective roles. The first actor, of course, is the markets. So the demand for vocational education and skills comes from the labor markets, and the market will provide the most updated information and guidance of what kinds of skills are really needed. So the second actor is the educational institutions. They provide lectures, trainings, and diplomas for students and equip them with skills to meet the demand from the labor market. The third, of course, is the government and the local governments mostly. They make policies, provide fundings, launch reforms regarding vocational education, etc. So the last, of course, is industry and company. They employ students and integrate real working experience through internship in addition to theoretical knowledge, etc., etc. So here is a diagram about the ratio of general education to vocational education in China from 1998 to last year. So this ratio, the ratio of general education and the vocational education, That ratio is often used as an indicator to show how China or any country is doing in the area of vocational training. So as we can see from this graph, the Chinese government's policy goal of 1:1 ratio between general education and vocational education is difficult to attain in China. Because, let us be honest, no one can hardly believe that China's vocational education and training graduates can reach the salary level and the social status of university graduates. So why is it difficult to increase the vocational academic ratio? There are basically 5 reasons behind that. First, the absence or the limited participation of employers and their associations. Those associations and the employers, they provide vital knowledge and expertise in training real workers, okay? So without them, the curriculum designed cannot really meet the demand from labor market. Secondly, since Chinese manufacturing enterprises are still in the middle or low end of the industrial value chain, a few of them are looking for breakthroughs, of course, but the total amount is not enough to support a higher level of vocational education development. Thirdly, cultural stereotypes and the social mindset regarding vocational education is seriously, I have to say, preventing lots of Chinese students and their parents to choose vocational education. And the fourth one, since vocational schools are mostly funded by governments in China, enterprises are not highly incentivized to partake in cooperative education. That's a huge problem. Finally, China entered the process of globalization with the advantage of demographic dividend. And the low price of labor is the biggest advantage in the past 4 decades. So the current situation of the industrial chain made the Chinese manufacturers very sensitive to labor cost. So if this cost is raised for coping with the development of, let's say, vocational training and education, the profit margin of many SMEs, small and medium enterprises, will be seriously narrowed. So that's why they do not have much incentive to choose or to encourage their workers to take vocational training. Having said that, okay, vocational training actually is a very important type of what we call implicit social policy. And what do we mean by that? Implicit social policy is the public policies that are functionally equivalent to explicit social policies in terms of dealing with social risks and maintaining a socially acceptable level of welfare. So in the case of vocational training, for example, it equips individuals with needed skills. And in that way, workers' employability increases, and this helps them to generate income. Similar cases could also, let's say, industrial policy that supports the viability of certain industries to keep workers' living standard. And of course, that could include trade policy, which may apply protectionist measures to protect internal product and labor markets from the external shock in global economy. So in terms of serving the functions of explicit social policy, we can call many aspects of the public policies as implicit social policy. By far, we have talked about both explicit and implicit social policies that would enable us to slay the giants of disease and ignorance. But we might also overlook an important precondition without which these policies would not be able to work. That is accessibility. So the next giant Beveridge talked about, scholar, was a frequent impediment to prevent the poor from getting access to the social security measures outlined in our earlier talk. So first, let's come back to Beveridge for a little bit and find out what does he mean by scholar. Beveridge, in his reports, actually, he was horrified by housing conditions in pre-war Britain, which he identified as the source of scholar. He claimed that scholar was a result of haphazard distribution of industry and the population, which eventually, of course, led to and reinforced poverty. So addressing these problems, Beveridge's report argued for an ambitious council housing building program with strong rent control, as we introduced earlier. Okay, so in his later writings, that was not included in the 1942 report, but in his later article called New Towns and the Case for Them, Beveridge set out a well-established argument in favor of new towns, establishing new towns in that article. This actually echoes Ebenezer Howard's idea of combining the advantage of a city and a country by living in what they call garden cities, okay, garden cities. So that is the idea, the development of Beveridge's idea to combat squalor, okay? So let's watch a case in Sichuan, okay? Watch a clip on a case in Sichuan for a brief overview of how squalor is fought upon in China. And you can see from this clip that idea from Beveridge, the new town, how is that materialized in the Chinese case?
5月10号，四川凉山州昭觉县异地扶贫搬迁县城集中安置点正式启动搬迁入住，将有超过1.8万名贫困群众陆续搬进新家。对于昭觉县阿土列尔村村民某色武哈来说，今天是值得纪念的日子。他分到了一套100平米的房子。
这2天哪怕是在家里面收拾这些被子和自己的衣服啊、棉纱啊，我就今天提起来这个县城里面来游试，看看这个房呀。
某色武哈原来生活的阿土列尔村，上下都要攀爬800米的悬崖，又被叫做悬崖村。他的这间屋子是土坯房，一家6口人挤在一个屋子里。
比以前的房子好多了啊！以前我们住的那个6把土呀，土桥吧，现在这个一方面不有爬梯梯了，二方面我的娃儿些读书啊很方便。
这次昭觉县异地扶贫搬迁共有4个社区，将安置来自全县28个乡镇、92个边远山村的3914户贫困群众。整个安置点入住将在5天内基本完成。安置点周边配套修建的7所学校、3所医院也在抓紧施工，今年8月20号之前交付使用。习近平总书记指出，搬得出的问题基本解决后，后续扶持最关键的是就业，乐业才能安居。解决好就业问题，才能确保搬迁群众稳得住，逐步能致富，防止返贫。现在四川省昭觉县已在安置点周边启动建设10多个现代农业产业园，将安排贫困群众就近务工，以产业发展带动就业，解决大部分贫困群众增收问题。另外，针对一些劳动能力不足、外出务工有困难的群众，全县已开发了公益性岗位5000多个。
现在新时代这肯定要社会越来越好嘛。
So, from this clip, we can learn several key points. First, a total of 18,000 villagers relocated from impoverished areas in Sichuan to the welfare housing built by the government in that county. And the residents of this village, let's call it Cliff Village, are part of the relocation program, and they are moved from remote, crowded shanty clay houses to urban, modernized, well-equipped buildings. So they say farewell to their old habits of climbing home with unsteady vine ladders. Now they are living in neighborhood with all essential infrastructures, which include 7 schools and 3 hospitals. Those are all built around the relocated neighborhood. And most importantly, job opportunities are also created for these relocated residents by the private firms. I will go back to this point later, by private firms. So from this, as this video shows, in the Chinese context, unlike in the pre-war Britain, squalor was both a cause and a result of a lack of access to industries instead of the haphazard distribution of industries as identified by William Beveridge himself. So that makes the planning and construction of a new town especially important, like William Beveridge emphasized in his later writing. So indeed, very often extreme poverty tended to occur in remote mountainous areas, as demonstrated in this picture from this slide. With such geographic locations, it was imaginable that even basic infrastructures, including roads, electricity, and water pumps, would incur high setup costs. So needless to say, it's almost impossible for any factory plants to be built there. So the inability to join the process of industrialization prolonged the poverty in these villages inevitably, and also prevented these villages to get, of course, integrated in the welfare system and the whole modern way of living. So that's from this, also from a citizen's view, we can have a basic sense of China's housing policy, especially from those of you who are not based in China. So if I need a place to stay in China, what do I do? Here is a mind map for the entire process. First, I will need to be clear whether I am holding an urban or rural, like household registration status. In China, we call it a hukou. Okay. After that, another important decision I will have to make is whether I want a house in a village or in the cities. Then, based on my current housing status, the residential area, income status, etc., I will then be able to get a subsidized from the government, get a loan from the bank to pay the full payment to get a house or apartment in either rural area or cities. It is worth noting that on that point, if I am holding an urban hukou, I am not allowed to purchase a house in village. This policy is meant to as a visible hands effort to ensure that the prices of housing do not get overheated in villages, and the poor household in villages would be able to afford a home, at least in their hometowns. So that is the working of the visible hand of the government. Therefore, in the ideal situation, both government and the private industries, I'm going back to the point of private firms, should be involved to increase the poor household access to industry and, of course, the welfare system. So while some of you may overlook in China, the industry has actually put in significant collective efforts to facilitate the government's agenda in both eliminating poverty and preventing poverty from coming back. So in general, they play different parts, the different roles. The government has the following roles as I listed here. First, setting out policies for subsidies or even free land quota and grants to attract industrial opportunities. Second, to design, to implement, and to finance resettlement poverty alleviation programs. Third, to do research and to sponsor agricultural industrial upgrades. And finally, government should provide the infrastructure required for other industrial expansion activities. So, and the private industry, they also actively respond to the government's call, sometimes for the purpose of building good social image, as we call this corporate social responsibility, or sometimes they do that to build good relationship with the government. But either way, they make a contribution in the process. Here are the roles the industry has been actively playing. First, they follow local government's lead and implement project construction. Secondly, they contract to build resettlement housing and facilities. Thirdly, they voluntarily provide consulting services, skill training sessions, and sharing product-specific expertise with poor villages. Of course, they also invest a lot of resources to participate in poverty alleviation directly. So in this way, better infrastructure are built, working opportunities are provided, and the living environment would be able to be improved. And in this way, the villagers in the poor areas, they can join the process of industrialization. In fact, we have emphasized a lot of the role of the private sector. Then the private sector, as you can see from here, often provides unique social benefits through what we call private social policies. So what do we mean by that? That refers to the additional provision of social protection and welfare by the private sector on top of the legally stimulated mandatory social benefits required by the government. So the private provision of social benefits might promote microeconomic efficiency and services. So that also serves the interest of the firms themselves. So private social policy is like what we call occupational benefits. According to a major social policy author, Richard Titmus, occupational benefits have many of the same functions as the benefits associated with social welfare, meaning the social benefits provided by the public authorities. Private social policy can take many forms. For example, firms can provide on-the-job training sessions to employees to enhance their productivity and hence earning abilities. Firms can also provide their employees with health insurance, pension funds, and build maternity facilities to female workers, etc. So all those occupational benefits can be counted as, to some extent, functionally equivalent to government-provided social welfare. Okay, so that is a very important component of the whole welfare system. Do not make a mistake that the poverty reduction is only the job of the government. It is only a job of the private sector. Well, okay, we have covered 4 of the 5 giants so far. So what's left? Idleness. But before I start this session, let me first ask you one question. Why do you think Beveridge put idleness as the last giant that human society needs to fight upon? Why is it the last giant? Is it only because idleness is the hardest to tackle? Okay, is this the most ferocious giant we encounter? Maybe not. Okay, but bear this question in mind. We shall come back to this point later, and this will be a very important point. So first, let's see by idleness, what does Beveridge refer to? In his report, the 1942 report, Beveridge states, idleness that destroys wealth and corrupts men, whether they are well fed off or not, when they are idle. So idleness is most manifested in voluntary unemployment, which leads to serious consequences. In his earlier work, 1909, which was written in 1909, Unemployment, a Problem in our Industry, Beveridge emphasized that the problem of unemployment lies in a very special sense at the root of most other social problems. Reasonable security of employment for the breadwinner is the basis of all private duties and all sound social action. So here you can see Beveridge assign a very huge importance to idleness. So to solve this problem, Beveridge suggested that men and women who have been unemployed for a certain period should be required as a condition of continued benefit to attend a work-of training center. Okay, he emphasized the training here. Such attendance being designed both as a means of preventing habitation to idleness and as a means of improving capacity for earning. Okay, here what Beveridge emphasized is training, and that is exactly how China fought idleness, as you can see from this and our final last short clip.
一个简单的面点操作台，一支擀面杖，几个和好的面团，站在自家的厨房里，蒋延丽跟着手机里的中式面点课，开始了新花样的技能解锁。
现在今天给我学习的是各式的花卷。
跟随视频中面点老师的讲解，蒋延丽纸上生花，擀一擀，卷一卷，捏一捏，刷层油，再撒一把葱花。不到20分钟，就做出了猪蹄卷、西瓜卷、鸳鸯卷、葱油卷等琳琅满目的小花卷。
我感觉可能口味上有提高，包括这个。
他从镇江路街道人社中心得知，可以通过网上授课的新方式，在家接受技能培训，就在第一时间报名缴费，参加了中式面点专业的学习。现在他已经系统学习了10多节课，正在积极筹备线下的实操考试。线下考试合格后，江大姐这次的培训费、鉴定费就可以向街道申请全额报销了。
针对那个今年的疫情呢，政府将这个事业人员的培训机会，每年由1次、3次这个免费培训，并且呢，这个扩大了这个报销的这个范围。你比方说这个江姐，她这个事业人员，她这次是1680，那么今年呢，全部进行报销。由过去这个报销的80%改为的这个100%全部报销。
这一款呢是这个三角梳，这一款呢是这个牛角梳，这个我还是比较得意这一款，我的就是这个虎皮卷儿还是比较不错的，同时们家人吃的这也是比我多好吃。
有了一定的基础，江大姐触类旁通，最近还迷上了西式烘焙。 香喷喷的新作品每每出炉，都在亲友群里大受欢迎。而他也陆续购置了更多专业设备，希望在未来亲手打造一个好味道的手工面点店。
等我练，在不断的锻炼，练好了以后呢，想着在家门口啊，或者适当的地方开一个小的店，然后呢，做出更多的美食来，这个让更多的人去品尝一下，对自己心里是一种满足、高兴。
Great, as demonstrated in this short clip. Zhang Yanli, okay, Madam Zhang, the lady, although she got unemployed, but she was having online pastry tutorials at home, and the cost for these tutorials will be 100% covered by the local government. So, of course, once the learners pass the practical exams, so during the pandemic, those who are unemployed are able to take up to 3 free training courses. Okay, so such trainings, thus as Beveridge explained, both incentivize people like this lady to actively look for job opportunities, but also help them to be able to earn more. Okay, that echoes the Beveridge's idea of training people to avoid being idle. Okay, so in fact, such trainings tackle directly 2 of the main causes of idleness. They are, according to Beveridge, first, people's lack of jobs or their lack of ability to secure a job due to their physical difficulties or lack of proper skills. But let's think about the question asked in the beginning of this section. Why? Why does Beveridge put idleness as the last giant that human society has to fight upon? The answer actually lies in the other cause of idleness. While welfare system and welfare policies help to battle other giants, the success of such a system and policies may, ironically or paradoxically, lead to the booming of idleness, meaning the welfare system's own very success may create its nemesis that we call idleness. So here is how Beveridge illustrates this point. He argued that the insured persons should not feel that income for idleness, however coarse, can come from a bottomless purse. But getting work or getting well may involve a change of habits, doing something that is unfamiliar or leaving one's friends or making a painful effort of some other kind. The danger of providing benefits. Look, the danger of providing benefits, which are both adequate in amount and indefinite in duration, is that men, as creatures who adapt themselves to circumstances, may settle down to them. Meaning, people, after receiving benefits, people may lose the incentive to be self-reliant. And we have many cases of this habit of settling down to benefits. For example, in China, we even heard stories from CCTV news saying that some rural villagers, they felt that they could not earn stable income working in the cities, and they were not able to earn enough from farming. Then they decided not to work and rely entirely on local government cash relief for a living. So one example highlighting their idleness is that some of them were even reluctant to feed the lambs that the government had given them for free under the targeted poverty eradication programs. But this is not unique to China. In developing and developed worlds alike, there are cases and incidences where people are stuck in poverty because of the tendency to settle down to benefits. For instance, in the US, okay, employers are complaining that COVID relief are making people lazy. It's making people not want to be part of the labor force. Similarly, in Ireland, 1 out of 7 people receiving benefits have never worked a single day in their lives. And the living on benefits has even become a life choice, a style of life. So that is to say, the very success, as I said, of welfare policies that aim to help the poor to get rid of poverty would paradoxically create over-dependence on the welfare system. And that is a problem of welfare dependency. So welfare dependency refers to the dependency on welfare benefits provided by the states as forming part of a person's means of financial support. there are a few proposed solutions that aim at tackling this huge problem, this problem of welfare dependency. But there haven't seen any universally applicable approach. So here I will introduce a few strategies that may work. The first strategy is a welfare handout mechanism that punishes non-job seekers. Okay. The second strategy is to apply strict scrutiny to welfare applicants. The third way of deterring welfare dependency is through conditional cash transfer. This strategy is typically seen in developing countries, meaning cash is given out to poor households conditional on the fulfillment of certain tasks like looking for jobs, etc., etc. Okay, so the last and perhaps the most controversial and most used and debated approach is to use the deterrence effect of stigmatization to play a psychological trick and discourage people from welfare abusing. So you may wonder, what is stigmatization and why it is controversial? Well, by definition, stigmatization is the action of describing or regarding someone or something as worthy of disgrace or disapproval. So when applied to the welfare dependency prevention, stigmatization creates embarrassment for those the welfare recipients and hence effectively prevents one from abusing the state's welfare. And as a strategy to solve the problem of welfare dependence, stigmatization has its pros and cons. As you can see here, on the one hand, that strategy is seems more effective in deterring people from abusing the welfare system than laws and regulations. And it effectively reduces the possibility and the duration of people applying for welfare coverage that has been demonstrated in many empirical studies. But on the other hand, stigmatization may deter people who encounter genuine financial hardship from accessing social welfare services. For example, in one study in 1976, the US researchers found that only 45% of all families that are eligible for the Aid to Family with Dependent Children, that's an act in the US, participated in that program. And the non-participation is due to the welfare stigma, because people do not want to apply for that because there is a stigma attached for the program. So this percentage is higher than the ratio of rejection cases. So whether stigmatization is an effective or appropriate approach to minimize welfare abuse, let's say it remains as a question mark here, and I leave that for you to think. Okay. So we have talked about how China deals with the giants. So while what Beveridge proposed in 1942 is still largely relevant to the Chinese quest for poverty eradication and shared prosperity, okay? China has managed to achieve great success despite all these difficulties and has established effective long-term mechanisms to prevent the return of extreme poverty. As we said, to have a long-term solution to poverty, meaning want, one needs to fight the other giants which are closely linked with want, namely disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. And here we can see China has built a welfare system to try to slay all the giants as Beveridge did almost 80 years ago. So this welfare system is composed of at least three components. The explicit social policy, which is the classic social insurance public programs, and the implicit social policy, which is the additional welfare measures such as vocational training, trade protection, etc., etc. And finally, private social policy, meaning the private sector's efforts to take a part in poverty elimination agenda. But last, I have some final thoughts for you. As we have noted, China has achieved significant success in slaying poverty, disease, ignorance, and squalor, of course. And the Chinese government, private firms, communities, they all have been trying every means to help the less well-off to get rid of the poverty through various of policies. So, but have you ever thought about that? Who are receiving and making those policies work? As I said, the policies, they do not work automatically. it needs the contribution of average citizens, meaning the citizens, they who are really fighting the giants. So if we go back to that question mark about idleness, about stigmatization, idleness remain a universal challenge even today that not only haunted the beverage in 1942, but is also disturbing social policy makers everywhere in the globe. So how do we fight idleness? Beveridge provided his answer actually in his report. In 1942, even foreseeing the possibility of welfare dependency, Beveridge was not deterred from that possibility. In fact, he had nevertheless urged to establish a welfare system because he believed that most men who have once gained the habit of work would rather work in ways to which they are used to than be idle. And all men, as I underlined here, all men would rather be well than ill. That shows Beveridge's conviction in the positive side of human nature. So in other words, Beveridge believed that individuals of our societies will be positively oriented and be determined to work hard as long as they are given sufficient opportunities through a well-constructed welfare system as we see in China today. So I think Beveridge has definitely seen such positivity and determination in the eyes of all the average citizens in Britain, as we can see that positivity in the eyes of those average Chinese citizens. So in a similar note, all of us should be aware that the construction of a secured, healthy, and prosperous society, a working welfare system, is not possible without the contribution of every single member of our society. It is the ordinary people around the community in our society who make the policy actually work. So they are, in fact, I have to say, all of us, we are the young Davids who should be joining in a fight against the Goliath to slay the giants, okay? In meaning, who are really fighting the giants? Not just government, not just employers, but every one of us. We are the young Davids who are fighting the giants, and we should be proud of that. And with that, I bring my lecture to a close. Thank you very much. And my sincere, thanks goes to Online Education Center from Tsinghua University, without whose support and organization, this lecture, this series would not be possible. And my special thanks also extends to my wonderful teaching assistants, Zhu Sisi and Lou Lam, and your contribution and your research is absolutely indispensable for this course, for today's lecture. So I give you my sincere thanks. And now I think it's time for some Q&A, right? Good, let's take some questions from Qiu Han. Qiu, are you there? Because you raise your hand. Oh, you cannot speak. Can you? Oh, you cannot speak. So I will read. Okay, we read some and try to respond to some of the questions in the chat box. First, what else can we do to improve our social security system in the future? I think technology should help a lot. Okay, as I said, the digitalization of the Chinese medical system, that helps to deal with the financial burden on the medical insurance system, something like that, okay? And which countries already have better experience in these areas? I would not say which country have better experience. I would say all countries, we all face similar challenges like a population aging one day or another, population aging, medical care. Each country should choose its own path